You're listening to Atlas11, built by AI, shaped by humans. Good day. I am Leora. This is today's briefing for Thursday, the 30th of April, 2026. We begin in the Middle East, day 61 of the Iran-US conflict, and the war moved indoors yesterday, into a congressional hearing room in Washington. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth appeared before lawmakers for the first time since the conflict began, defending the naval blockade and describing the members of Congress who oppose it as, in his words, the biggest adversary. Outside that room, the numbers are accumulating. United States Central Command reports that 42 commercial vessels have been redirected away from Iranian ports since the blockade began. 69 million barrels of Iranian oil are currently sitting in tankers that cannot sell their cargo. Oil markets responded. Brent crude touched $114 a barrel on Wednesday. President Trump met with energy executives to discuss how to sustain the blockade for months if needed. Meanwhile, Iran's parliament speaker, in a post on X, mocked the administration's earlier warnings that Iranian oil infrastructure was days from collapse. 3 days passed, he noted. No wells exploded. Diplomatic channels remain open through Islamabad, where quiet talks continue. Still in conflict, but further west, and a generation removed. 20 years ago, the name Darfur appeared on front pages around the world. This week, the United Nations Children's Agency UNICEF published a new child alert, and the parallel it draws is not a distant one. The report is titled Darfur, 20 Years On, Children Under Threat. The same homes burned, the same schools destroyed, the same families fleeing. But today the scale is larger, and the international response is smaller. Since Sudan's war began in April 2023, the UN has verified more than 5,700 serious violations against children across the country. At least 4,300 have been killed or maimed. In the first 3 months of 2026 alone, at least 160 children were killed and 85 injured, a 50% increase over the same period last year. Drone strikes account for nearly 80% of those deaths. Across Darfur, 4.2 million children are projected to face acute malnutrition this year, and over 8 million are out of school. UNICEF's Sudan appeal for 2026 is currently 16% funded. The agency's executive director, Catherine Russell, said, 20 years ago, the world united in outrage. We cannot allow history to repeat itself. From the conflicts to the numbers that connect them. Elias takes the economy.
The International Monetary Fund released its World Economic Outlook today, its most comprehensive quarterly assessment of where the global economy stands. The headline figure, global growth, is projected at 3.1% for 2026, well below pre-pandemic averages. The report identifies the war in the Middle East as the primary new disruptive force. Rising commodity prices, firmer inflation expectations, and tighter financial conditions are all products of the conflict. The pressure is not evenly distributed. Emerging markets and commodity-importing developing economies face the sharpest slowdown. Countries that were already carrying vulnerability are now carrying more. The IMF lists downside risks as dominant. A longer or broader conflict, deeper geopolitical fragmentation, or renewed trade tensions could weaken growth further and destabilize financial markets. The fund also flags something quieter, the erosion of confidence in independent economic institutions, as central banks in several countries face political pressure. That erosion, the report warns, takes longer to repair than the conditions that caused it. One more from the economy, this one about who pays for the news you read. Australia unveiled draft legislation this week that puts a new pressure on the world's largest digital platforms. The proposal, called the News Bargaining Incentive, would impose a 2.25% levy on the Australian revenues of Meta, Google, and TikTok, unless those companies strike commercial deals with local news publishers. What makes this law structurally different from earlier attempts? Canada tried something similar in 2023, is that the levy applies whether or not the platforms carry news at all. Canada's law left platforms a way out, walk away from news. Meta took it. Australia has removed that exit. If deals are reached with enough publishers, the effective rate drops to 1.5%, generating between 200 and 250 million Australian dollars for local journalism. Meta has called the proposal nothing more than a digital services tax. Prime Minister Albanese's response was direct. We are a sovereign nation, and our policies are guided by what is best for Australia. The draft goes to Parliament by July. From the economy to the courts, something that affects hundreds of thousands of people who cannot vote on it. The United States Supreme Court heard arguments Wednesday on one of the most consequential immigration cases of the term. At issue is temporary protected status, the program that allows people from countries facing extraordinary conditions to live and work legally in the United States. The Trump administration wants to end TPS for approximately 350,000 Haitians and Syrians. Both groups were granted status because their home countries were considered too dangerous or too destroyed for safe return. Haiti after the 2010 earthquake and subsequent instability, Syria after more than a decade of civil war. The legal question before the court is whether the administration can cancel TPS grants through executive action or whether Congress intended the status to be more permanent. The ruling, expected later this term, will determine the legal standing of hundreds of thousands of people currently working, raising families, and paying taxes in the United States. We stay in politics, moving from Washington to Brussels. The European Commission issued preliminary findings Wednesday that Meta is failing to protect children on Facebook and Instagram in violation of the bloc's Digital Services Act. The investigation, which began in 2024, found that Meta lacked effective measures to prevent children under 13 from signing up, and that the tool for reporting underage users requires up to 7 clicks, is rarely pre-filled, and almost never results in any action. In the Commission's words, Meta's risk assessment of child access is incomplete and arbitrary. Meta responded that it disagrees with the findings and that it has measures in place to detect and remove underage users. Violations of the Digital Services Act can result in fines of up to 6% of a company's worldwide annual revenue. These preliminary findings come 2 months after 2 separate U.S. court rulings found that aspects of Meta's platform design contributed to teen addiction and mental health harms. Meta now has the opportunity to respond in writing before the Commission issues a final decision. Leora picks up from here. Medicine and something from the science desk.
A finding published this week adds a new chapter to a story that affects hundreds of millions of people living with joint pain. Researchers have discovered the presence of the GLP-1 hormone, the same mechanism that underlies Ozempic and Wegovy, in human joints. Until now, GLP-1 was associated primarily with blood sugar regulation and appetite. Its presence in joint tissue was not predicted. The discovery opens a potential therapeutic pathway for inflammatory joint conditions, including arthritis, which affects over 500 million people globally. Researchers believe the hormone may play a role in modulating joint inflammation, a finding that could eventually point toward new treatment strategies using existing drug classes. The work is early stage. Clinical application is years away. But discoveries of this kind, where a known mechanism appears somewhere unexpected, tend to accelerate research in directions that weren't visible before. From medicine to society, and 2 women who took on very large opponents and won. The Goldman Environmental Prize, often called the Nobel for grassroots environmental work, announced its 2026 recipients this week. 2 stand out for the same underlying quality: individuals who decided, without institutional power, to hold powerful institutions to account. In Colombia, Yuvelis Morales Blanco spent years organizing campaigns that ultimately halted commercial fracking in her country. In the United Kingdom, Sarah Finch pursued a legal challenge against an oil company that stretched across years and courts, and she won in what became a landmark ruling with implications well beyond the UK. The prize is awarded to, in its own words, ordinary people taking extraordinary actions to protect the planet. Both this year's recipients demonstrate that the phrase is not rhetorical. They were private citizens working against entrenched industry interests, and the record of what they changed is now permanent. 2 science stories now. Elias.
66 million years ago, a large Tyrannosaurus rex, now known to science as Scotty, housed at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum in Canada and the largest T-Rex specimen ever found, broke a rib. The bone began to heal. Then Scotty died, and the healing stopped, and the rib fossilized. This week, researchers from the University of Regina published findings from inside that bone. Using synchrotron X-rays, high-powered beams from particle accelerators that can penetrate dense fossil material without damaging it, they found a network of preserved blood vessels, iron-rich structures, remnants of the biological process that was mobilizing blood flow to repair the fracture, had mineralized and survived 66 million years intact. No dinosaur DNA has ever been recovered. Genetic material does not survive deep time. But vascular tissue, under the right conditions of preservation, apparently can. The finding, published in scientific reports, gives researchers a new window into how dinosaurs healed and, more broadly, what kinds of biological evidence fossilization can preserve. The team now plans to apply the same synchrotron technique to other specimens. We stay in science and move from an ancient world to an ancient question. For decades, the collapse of the Maya civilization has carried a dominant explanation: drought. The climate turned, the water ran out, the cities fell. New research published this week challenges that framing. While drought clearly played a role, the study finds the picture is considerably more complex, involving political fragmentation, agricultural breakdown, and accumulated social stress that drought alone cannot account for. The Maya civilization, which covered what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador, reached its peak between approximately 200 and 900 of the Common Era, before entering a collapse that unfolded over more than a century. The study does not remove climate from the story. It adds the human dimensions that climate models have, until now, left out. The finding reopens one of archaeology's most debated questions, and with it the broader question of what collapse actually means for a civilization. Slow, contested, multi-causal, rather than the single-event picture that clean explanations tend to produce. One last story, and it is, genuinely, a good one. Leora.
And now the good word. Her name is Veronica. She is a cow. She lives on an organic farm in Austria, owned by a man named Wittgar Wiegele, and she has apparently been using a broom, not by accident, not once. Consistently, with what researchers at the University of Veterinary Medicine in Vienna are now describing as multi-purpose tool use. Veronica picks up a broom and uses it in two distinct ways depending on which part of her body she wants to scratch. The bristle end for her back and tougher areas, the handle end for her underbelly and more sensitive spots. The same tool, two functions, chosen deliberately. To understand why this matters. Until now, this level of tool sophistication, using one object for different purposes based on context, had been documented consistently only in chimpanzees. Not horses, not dogs, not any of the animals humans have lived alongside for centuries. Certainly not the animal that has shared our farms for over 10,000 years. Dr. Antonio Osuna Mascaro of the University of Veterinary Medicine told the BBC, "We were not expecting cows to be able to use tools, and we were not expecting a cow to use a tool as a multi-purpose tool. 10,000 years of shared history, and Veronica was apparently waiting for someone to pay attention. Her owner, Wittgar Wiegele, said simply, 'Save the nature, then you protect yourself.' We think Veronica would agree, though she might ask for the broom back first." That concludes today's briefing. Be well.